The ink was already spilling before Neve could stop it. She knew she shouldn't be writing. Knew it the way she knew the cold was coming. The way she knew the roses in the small garden would be brown by month's end. The way she knew certain truths without ever wanting to hold them. But the quill moved anyway. It always did. Because the heart, she had learned, does not ask the mind for permission. The garden breathed around her. Late blooms, heavy with the last of the season, leaned toward a sun that was already thinking about leaving. Somewhere beyond the hedges, the guard was training the ring of steel, the grunt of effort, the bark of a captain's voice. Men and women who had all passed the same trials she had, who had all knelt in the same moonlight and waited for the same thing, and transformed. She had not. 22 years old, Neve thought, and still writing, like a girl who believes the story ends the way she wants it to. She looked down at the page. I hope that one day you finally see me. Not the smile you throw over your shoulder. Not the quick glance that lands on me the way rain lands on stone, brief and then gone. I mean, see me. All the way down. Her hand paused. Hope made a fool of you, slowly. It let you believe there was a version of the morning where the prince walked past and stopped. Turned. Said your name like it mattered. Torvald had walked past her that very morning. Near the kitchens where the bread smell hung thick and warm. He had smiled that easy, careless smile that cost him nothing and undid her completely, and for one dizzy heartbeat, the whole world had tilted, as if that smile had been made only for her. Except it hadn't. She knew that. Of course she knew that. The heart just didn't care. I know I am not the only one, she wrote. Not the most interesting. Not the one who holds your eyes for long. And still my stupid, stubborn heart chose you. Even knowing that loving you means loving uncertainty, means the risk of never being chosen at all. She bit her lip, and that was when the shadow fell across her page. Well, look at that. Little Neve is writing again. Neve's stomach dropped before she even lifted her eyes. Sethra stood there. Golden hair falling in waves, so perfect they looked painted. Two other ladies of the guard flanked her, all three in training leathers, but too clean. Far too clean, the leathers of people who came to watch others sweat. It's none of your business, Neve said, and pulled the journal to her chest. Oh. Sethra tilted her head. But I think it is. She reached out. That casual, entitled certainty that the world would simply hand her whatever she wanted because it always had. Show me. No. The word came out firmer than Neve felt. But firm was not the same as strong, and Sethra had never respected a wall she believed she could climb. She snatched. The leather slipped through Neve's fingers like water, like sand, like every good thing Neve had ever tried to hold. Sethra, give it back. But Sethra was already reading, and the other two were already laughing. Soft, delighted the laughter of women watching a performance staged just for them. I hope that one day you finally see me, Sethra read, dragging each word out, tasting it. I know I am not the only one. She looked up, eyes bright with false pity. Oh, Neve, how sweet. Heat climbed Neve's throat, her cheeks, the roots of her red hair. Give it back. How can you be this foolish? Sethra's voice went almost gentle, which made it so much worse. She turned to her ladies, delighted. She daydreams about the prince. The laughter got louder. He's never going to look at you. Sethra stepped closer and lowered her voice to something almost tender, almost kind, which was the cruelest thing of all. You can't even transform. The sentence landed like a blade laid flat against skin, not cutting, just resting there, reminding you it could. Neve reached out her hand, kept her voice level somehow. "Give me my journal, then go." So Sethra threw it. It arced through the air pages, fluttering like a wounded bird, spinning end over end, and it came down on the grass, right at the edge of the training ground, right where the guard still moved in their precise, brutal formations. The world stopped. Every eye turned toward the small leather book lying in the dirt among the boots of the strongest people in the kingdom. The captain bent. Broad-shouldered old scars written across his forearms, a face like weathered oak. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, frowned. "Whose is this?" Neve could not answer. Shame had frozen her solid. She's silent, feeling the weight of every stare press down on her. The warriors, the ladies. Sethra smiling, that small, satisfied smile of a woman who had won. And then a voice cut clean through the silence. "It's mine." It was not the captain's voice. It was his. Neve lifted her eyes. And there he was. Alaric, the Alpha King. Tall, absurdly, impossibly tall shoulders, built to carry things no one else could lift. Dark hair falling loose over them, heavy, willed a little damp from training a strand or two stuck to his jaw. He never seemed to care about it. Never tied it, never cut it. As if it were the one part of him that refused to be ruled. He stood at the edge of the ground, arms crossed, watching the world. The way he always watched it, as if everything in the kingdom had to pass through his eyes before it was allowed to become real. He walked toward the captain. Slow, deliberate, each step a decision. He held out his hand. The captain gave him the journal without a word, and Alaric held it carefully, as if he already knew exactly what it was. Then he turned, and he walked toward Neve. She could not move, could not breathe, because a king was crossing a garden to reach her, and the whole world had gone very quiet, and his dark eyes had found hers, and would not let go. He stopped in front of her. He held the journal out between them. Offered it the way you offer something you understand is precious. "I think this is yours," he said. His voice was low, rough at the edges, carrying something underneath it she had no name for. Neve took it, with hands that shook. Her fingers brushed his one brief, unbearable second of contact. His skin was warm, steady, real in a way that made everything else feel like a dream she was about to wake from. "Thank you," she whispered. Barely a sound. He didn't answer. He simply held her gaze one moment longer, as if reading something she had never written down. Something she hadn't dared put on any page. Then he turned and walked back to his guard, leaving her standing there with her heart slamming so hard against her ribs, she was certain the entire garden could hear it. Across the grass, Sethra's smile was gone. Neve clutched the journal to her chest and left without looking back. That night, sleep would not come. She lay on the narrow bed she shared with her mother in the small servants' quarters at the far end of the castle, and stared at the dark wooden beams above her. The journal rested beneath her pillow, a small, hard weight like a secret she was afraid to sleep on top of. She kept replaying it, the way he had walked toward her, the low voice, the eyes that seemed to see straight through the walls she had spent years building. Alaric was hard to read. 27 years old, and carrying a stillness that felt older than that, as if he had already lived several lives, and come out the other side of each one, carved a little sharper. She remembered him at 15. She had only been 10, but the image had never left her. His father dead in a border war against another wolf kingdom, the crown coming down onto shoulders that had barely finished growing. He had stood in the throne room with dry eyes and a locked jaw, while the whole kingdom held its breath, waiting to see if the boy would break. He didn't. 2 years after that, when the illness finally took his mother, the one that had eaten her slowly for so long, Alaric had grieved alone. No one saw, but everyone knew. And when he came out of that grief, he came out different, harder, quieter, more king than boy. He had built a wall around himself that no one could climb. Every woman in the castle had tried. Every single one. Sethra had been the most obvious about it, arriving to training in strategic necklines and rehearsed smiles, offering herself in a dozen small ways. Nothing. He never looked, never yielded. It was as if the door had been bricked over from the inside. And then there was Torvald. Niamh turned onto her side and sighed into the dark. Torvald was everything his brother was not. 5 years younger, 22, and it showed. Where Alaric was winter. Torvald was a bright, careless afternoon. His face was young and symmetrical, and that smile came so easily, it was almost insolent, as if he had decided the world was a game, and he'd already read all the rules. His hair was dark like his brother's, but fell in soft, deliberate waves, framing his face, the way flattering light frames a portrait. I was handsome, in a way that made people forget to think. Niamh knew this. She knew he kept the company of 6 ladies in the castle and beyond it. She knew he took nothing seriously. She knew that it was foolish to feel what she felt. But she had fallen for him at 16. He had helped her carry a stack of books from the library to her mother's rooms and told a joke so silly she'd laughed until her ribs ached and touched her shoulder lightly, and then he was gone. 6 years. 6 years and he still didn't know. Pathetic, she told herself. She shut her eyes and tried to push it all away, because she was not like Sethra. She had no noble blood. She could not even transform. A quiet shame to her parents, both of them once of the royal guard. Especially to her father. Bryn, head of the guard, and Beta, to the old king, dead in service before Niamh was old enough to keep more than fragments of him. But she remembered his hands. Enormous. Gentle. She remembered being lifted onto his shoulders so she could touch the top of a door frame and feel for one bright moment like the tallest person in the world. And she remembered the promise, the one the old king had made him, that his widow and daughter would always have a place within these walls. That was why Niamh was here at all. Charity dressed up as honor. She had gone through the Royal Wolf Academy like every other child. Trained, waited. 15 came, and no wolf. 16, 17. At 18, when it became undeniable, they gave her the ledgers instead. Documents, records, important work, everyone said, kindly. Invisible work, they did not say. Safe. While everyone else transformed and fought and shone. She was 22, and could barely hold a sword without her arm trembling. Weak. The word arrived every time Sethra looked at her. Niamh buried her face in the pillow and let the shame close over her like water. Across the small dark room her mother stirred. Can't sleep, little fire. Orla's voice was thin these days. It had been getting thinner all autumn, the way the light did. Did something in her chest that rattled when she breathed too deep. She never complained. Orla had buried a husband and raised a daughter who could not become what the world demanded, and she had done it without ever once making Niamh feel like a disappointment. That Niamh sometimes thought was its own kind of strength no wolf could grant. "I'm fine, Mama. Go back to sleep. You're doing that thing." Orla's hand found hers in the dark. warm, papery, sure. That thing where you decide you're less than you are, and then lie very still, so no one will notice. Neve laughed a little wetly. You always know. I made you. I get to know. They lay in the quiet a while. The rattle in Orla's chest, the wind against the shutters. Mama, Neve said finally, do you think there's something wrong with me that it never came? She felt her mother go still, not with hurt, with care, the way you go still when you are about to hand someone something you don't want them to drop. Listen to me, Orla said. You are not missing a wolf, my girl. Mama, you are not. Firm now, a voice from a younger, stronger woman surfacing for just a moment. You simply haven't been given a reason worth waking it for. That's all. Some doors don't have broken locks. Some doors are just waiting for the right hand. Neve said nothing, because she wanted so badly to believe it. And because wanting to believe a thing was not the same as believing it. Sleep, Orla murmured, and squeezed her hand. The morning is kinder than the night. It always has been. But the morning, as it turned out, had its own plans. On the far side of the castle in the study that had been his father's, Alaric was not sleeping either. Maps and reports lay spread across the great oak desk, demanding the attention he could not give them. The lamplight guttered. Outside, the autumn wind worked its cold fingers into the old stones, and his mind was in a garden. With her, he dragged a hand down his face. He should not be thinking about Neve, should not be thinking about the way she had stood there, exposed, cornered, holding that battered little book against her chest as if it were the last true thing in the world. Should not be remembering her wide green eyes, or the way she had whispered thank you, in a voice that sounded like it might break in half. But he was. He remembered all of it. He had watched her grow up in this castle. A constant, almost invisible presence, always at the edge of things. He'd see her carrying papers, helping her mother, sitting alone in the garden with that faraway look, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Her hair was the color of banked coals, long past her waist, catching red whenever the light hit it right. She was beautiful, painfully so, and she had absolutely no idea. I knew because he had watched how she moved, shoulders curved slightly inward, as if she were trying to take up less room in the world, as if she believed she was less than she was. He had watched the other ladies treat her cruelly, and watched her let them, and it had irritated him more than it had any right to. She is not my responsibility. Except she was. Technically, I had been there when Bryn died. Only a boy himself then, but he'd stood close enough to hear the man's last words as he gripped the old king's hand. Take care of them. Take care of my family. And his father had promised. Had given the widow and the little red-haired girl a place inside these walls. And when the crown came down onto Alaric's young shoulders, so did the promise. He inherited both in the same terrible season. So yes, technically, she was his to protect. Nothing more. Alaric leaned back and closed his eyes. Nothing more, except that his heart had slammed against his ribs when he saw that journal fall near the boots of his guard. Except that something cold and dangerous had moved through him when he saw Sethra smiling her calculated smile. Except that he had crossed that garden before he had decided to drawn by something older than thought. That was not the shape of duty. He knew the shape of duty. He had been carrying it since he was 15. This was a different weight entirely. He opened his eyes and stared at nothing. He could not feel this. He had no right. He had a kingdom to rule and real threats to weigh, and decisions that touched thousands of lives. He had no time and no permission to think about a woman who could not transform, who was almost certainly in love with his own brother, who would never once look at him twice. Let it go, he told himself. He did not. He would come to understand much later that this was the night everything began. Not the kiss, not the river. This. A man alone in a study, telling himself a lie he had already stopped believing. For 3 days after the garden, Niamh did not see Torvald. Or rather, she saw him, but never alone. Always in motion, always ringed by guards or ladies or counselors, always just out of reach. She caught glimpses, a flash of dark hair, a laugh from around a corner that might have been his. And each time her heart lurched like a boat against a dock, and each time she scolded it, and each time it did not listen. Because hope again. Hope did not learn, and she noticed, though she tried not to, that Sethra had gone strangely quiet. Since the garden, the ladies had kept their distance. The cruelty had gone underground, which should have felt like relief. It felt like the pause before weather. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Sethra found her in the corridor near the royal quarters. Neve. The voice was friendly. That was the first wrong thing. Niamh stopped, held her ledgers a little tighter. What do you want? Nothing. Sethra tilted her head, golden hair sliding across her shoulder. I came to bring you news, actually. Niamh waited. Prince Torvald asked to see you. Her heart jumped. It should not have. It did. What? He wants to kiss you. Sethra said it the way you'd mentioned the weather. Today, here in this corridor. But it has to be a surprise, you understand. He wants it to feel romantic. Niamh's mouth had gone dry. That's why he asked you to wear this. Sethra held out a ribbon, blue silk, soft as water. A blindfold, so you won't see him coming, so it's unexpected, magical. She smiled, and it almost looked real. He made me swear to keep it secret. I shouldn't even be telling you it's a kiss. Niamh stared at the ribbon. It didn't make sense. Torvald was not the type to plan a tender thing. Torvald did not plan at all. He simply arrived, took what delighted him, and drifted onward like weather. But what if? What if, after all these years, he had finally seen her? Stupid, said the voice in her head, and the voice sounded like Sethra. When? She heard herself ask. At sunset. Put on the blindfold and wait. He'll come. And before Neve could ask a single one of the questions, crowding her throat, the ladies were already gone, walking away, heads bent together, laughing softly at something Niamh could not hear, leaving her alone in the corridor with a blue ribbon and a heart beating far, far too fast. The sun was low and red when she came back. The castle had gone quiet in that particular way it did at dusk, as if the stones themselves were holding their breath. Shadows stretched long across the floor. Niamh stood in the empty corridor with the ribbon in her hands, feeling more foolish with every passing minute. He's not coming. Logic spoke plainly, firmly, without a single ounce of mercy. You are being made a fool. Again. You know this. You have always known this. But her heart refused to hear it. So she raised the ribbon, and she tied it across her eyes, and the world went dark. There was only her breathing now, and the cold of the stone floor beneath her bare feet, and the small, terrible flame of hope she could not seem to put out, no matter how many times the world doused it. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. 15. Stupid. So stupid. You are 22 years old, and you are standing blindfolded in a hallway because a woman who hates you told you a story you wanted to hear. Take it off. Take it off and go home and never. Footsteps, slow, steady, approaching. Her heart lurched into her throat. She straightened. Every nerve in her body pulled taut as a bowstring. Because someone was coming, someone real, and she could feel it now, a presence filling the space in front of her, close, warm, undeniable. The heat of a body, the scent of earth and leather, and something underneath it, something wild, with no name. "Is it you?" she whispered. Barely a breath, silence. But he was there. She could feel him there. And so because 6 years of waiting had built a pressure that had to break somewhere, Niamh rose up onto her toes, heart hammering, and found his lips with hers. The kiss was not what she had imagined. It was not soft. It was not careful. It was firm and deep and startlingly certain, as if he had been waiting for this, exactly as long as she had. His lips moved against hers with an intensity that stole the breath straight out of her lungs. One hand found her waist and drew her closer, and her knees went weak, and the whole dark world narrowed to this single point of contact. Torvald, her mind whispered. But something was wrong. Something was off. Different from every version she had built in her head over 6 long years. Not less. More. So much more than she had ever dared imagine. More heat, and more weight, and more want. And it frightened her, even as she leaned into it. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. He pulled back, and she heard his footsteps retreating. Quick, strong. Disappearing down the corridor into the dark, Niamh tore the ribbon from her eyes, blinked into the dimness. Empty. The corridor was empty. She turned, searching, but there was nothing. Only shadows and silence, and the last red light dying against the far wall. She touched her lips, still warm, still holding the pressure, the taste, the impossible fact of it. Torvald. It had been him. It had to have been him. Who else could it possibly be? For the first time in her whole life, someone had kissed her. And it had been perfect. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt, and she pressed her hand to her mouth to keep the smile from spilling out where anyone might see. And she walked home on legs that did not feel entirely her own. At the far end of the corridor, hidden in the deep shadow of a stone archway, Alaric watched her go. His jaw was set. His fists were clenched at his sides. He had seen her standing there, blindfolded, trusting, waiting with that small, terrible hope written all over her face. He had seen, and he had not been able to walk away. Fool, he told himself. Turn around. This is not for you. This was never meant for you. But his feet had carried him forward anyway. He had stopped in front of her, close enough to feel the warmth coming off her skin. And when she had whispered, "Is it you?" something inside him had cracked straight down the center. Because he knew. He knew she wasn't asking for him. She was asking for his brother. If only she knew how beautiful she is. The thought came unbidden. Raw. Too honest to survive daylight. If only I could be the one she means. And then she had risen onto her toes. He should have stepped back. Should have said something, anything. His name an apology, a warning. Should have done any one of 100 things other than the thing he did. But he kissed her. Because 6 years of watching her from across every room had built a pressure in him too. Because he was a king who had denied himself everything for everyone forever, and for one blind moment in a darkening hall, he was simply a man being reached for by a woman he had never let himself want out loud. and now watching her disappear down the corridor with her fingers pressed to her lips and her eyes lit up like the first star of evening, Alaric understood exactly what he had done. I had made the most dangerous mistake of his life, because Neve believed she had kissed Torvald. And Alaric had no idea, none at all, how to tell her the truth without breaking every fragile thing that hope had just built inside her. He stood in the archway long after she had gone in the last of the red light, and he did not move. Coward, he thought. And for once the word felt earned. The next morning, Neve carried the secret through the castle like a lit candle cupped against the wind. She was terrified of it going out. She was terrified of it catching everything on fire. She could not decide which she wanted more. She looked for Torvald in every corridor and did not find him. She looked for him at the training ground and did not find him. She told herself this was fine, that a kiss like that did not require immediate explanation, that some things were more beautiful for the waiting. She was, she would admit, later extremely good at telling herself things. She found Malin instead. The old man was sitting on the low wall by the herb garden, face turned up toward a sun he could not see. Malin had been blind for longer than Neve had been alive, but no one in the castle had ever mistaken blindness for not seeing. I was the eldest of them. He had watched the old king crowned and the old king buried and the young king crowned in his place. He held the memory of the kingdom the way other men held keys. "You walk lighter today, Neve of the Ledgers," he said before she had made a sound. She stopped. "How do you always—" "Your footsteps." He smiled at the sun. "Yesterday they apologized for existing. Today they merely pass through." He patted the wall beside him. "Sit. Old men need young voices, or they forget the words for things." She sat. They were quiet a while. A bee moved fat and lazy over the last of the lavender. "Something has changed in you," Malin said. Not a question. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'm just—" She stopped herself. "It's nothing. It's foolish. It'll come to nothing probably." "Ah." Malin nodded slowly, as if she had said something wise. "You've decided the ending for the stories told. People do that, especially the ones the world taught to expect the worst." He turned his clouded eyes toward her, and it was the strangest thing, she always felt more seen by this blind old man than by anyone with working eyes. "I knew your father, you know. Bryn, big as a barn and soft as new bread. He worried about you." Something tightened in Neve's chest. "He shouldn't have. He worried," Malin went on gently, "that the world would teach you you were nothing before you had the chance to learn you were something." That was his fear. Not the wolf, never the wolf. He turned back to the sun. "There are doors in this world that are not locked, child. They only seem so. They are simply waiting for the right hand to try them." Neve went very still, because her mother had said something almost exactly like it, only 2 nights before. And she did not believe in signs. She had trained herself not to. Signs were for people the world had been kind to. "And how does a person know," she asked carefully, "which door is theirs?" Malin laughed, a dry, warm rustling sound like leaves. "Oh, they don't. Not until they're standing in front of it, with their heart pounding and every reason in the world to walk away." He reached over and patted her hand once. "That's how you know it's yours. It frightens you exactly as much as it calls you." She sat with the old man until the sun moved off the wall. And she did not tell him about the corridor or the ribbon or the kiss. But she carried his words home the way she had carried the candle. Cupped. Careful. Half of what they might light. That night in the small dark room, Orla's breathing was worse. The rattle had deepened. It caught sometimes at the top of each breath and held a beat too long before letting go. And every time it held, Heave's own breath held with it, until she realized she'd been lying rigid in the dark for an hour, timing her mother's lungs like a drummer, keeping a song alive by force of will alone. "Stop listening to me sleep," Orla murmured, without opening her eyes. "It's unsettling." "I'm not." "You're a terrible liar, little fire. You get it from your father. His face told every secret he ever tried to keep." A pause. A slow breath caught released. "Speaking of faces, yours has been telling a secret since yesterday." Nev was grateful suddenly for the dark. "It's nothing, Mama. It's a someone. A nothing doesn't make a girl float 3 inches off the floor." Orla shifted and found her daughter's hand, the way she always did, unerring even half asleep. "Just be careful with that heart of yours. It's a bigger one than you know. And the world has not always been gentle with the things it doesn't understand." "I'm careful. You're hopeful. It's not the same thing, though it may be the braver one." Orla squeezed her hand. Her voice was thinning towards sleep. "Whoever he is, I hope he's the kind who stays. You deserve the kind who stays, Nev. Not the kind who smiles and moves on with the weather. The kind who's still there in the morning. When the smiling's done, and there's only the two of you, and the fire's gone low." Neve lay very still, because she was thinking of a careless, beautiful smile that came and went like sun through clouds. And she was thinking without meaning to of a low, rough voice in a garden saying, "I think this is yours," and dark eyes that had held hers a moment too long, as if reading a page she had never dared to write. She pushed the second thought away, firmly. The way you push away a door you're not ready to try. "Sleep, Mama," she whispered, and her mother did. But Nev lay awake a long while listening to the rattle. Catch and release, catch and release, and holding 2 men in her mind who could not have been more different, one bright and one dark, one who arrived and one who watched, and telling herself with total certainty that she already knew which one had kissed her in the dark. She was so sure. She was so completely, tenderly, heartbreakingly sure. And on the other side of the castle, the man who had actually kissed her sat awake in his father's study, running one thumb over his own lower lip, as if he could still feel her there. "Tell her," said the honest part of him. "Tell her, and lose her before you've ever had her," said the rest. Because the moment he told her the truth, one of 2 things would happen. She would be humiliated, flooded with the memory of rising onto her toes for a brother who had never come. Or she would be angry, and she would be right to be, because he had stood there and let her believe a lie with his silence, which was its own kind of taking. Either way, the light he'd seen in her face as she walked away would go out, and he found sitting there in the dark, king of a kingdom, master of thousands, unable to master this one small ruinous thing that he could not bear to be the one who put it out. So he said nothing. He told himself it was mercy. He was beginning to suspect it was cowardice. I was beginning to suspect, too, that his brother would not stay ignorant for long. Torvald noticed things. Not deeply, never deeply, but he noticed. He noticed when a woman glowed. He noticed when attention that had once been his drifted elsewhere. And a woman who believed the prince had kissed her in a corridor was a woman who would sooner or later glow at him across a hall. And Torvald, being Torvald, would not correct her. He would simply accept it. the way he accepted every good thing that fell into his lap. He would let her believe it, and he would enjoy being believed in, and he would spend the adoration the way he spent everything. Carelessly. Completely. And then he would move on, and Neve would break. Alaric set his jaw and stared into the low fire. I had spent his whole reign protecting this kingdom from every threat that came at its walls. Border kings, winter famines, the slow poison of court intrigue. He had faced all of it with the same cold, steady certainty. He did not know how to protect one red-haired woman from a hope he himself had lit, especially when the thing she most needed protecting from was the truth. He rose, crossed to the window, looked out over the sleeping castle, all its small lit windows going dark one by one, and somewhere among them, a narrow room where a girl who could not transform was lying awake, cupping the wrong name against her heart like a candle. I will make this right, he told himself. He did not yet know how. He did not yet know about the river or the second cruelty. Sethra was already quietly unspooling, or the ball where the whole kingdom would go silent, or the bite that would wake something in Neve that had been sleeping her entire life, waiting exactly as her mother said for a reason worth waking for. He knew only that a door had opened in the dark of a corridor, and that he had walked through it, and that there was no walking back. Outside, the wind came down off the mountains, cold and clean, carrying the first true breath of winter. It moved through the bare branches of the garden where a journal had fallen. It rattled the shutters of a narrow room where a mother slept and a daughter did not. It found the high window of a study where a king stood alone, and it did not comfort him, because winter winds are honest, and they do not pretend to be anything but what they are. The kingdom slept, and 3 lives that had orbited one another for years at careful, respectable distances had finally, in the space of one blind, breathless moment, begun to fall. None of them knew yet how far, but the falling had begun. And once they start, do not stop until they've reached the ground. Part 2. For 3 days, Torvald did not appear. And then he did. Not by accident. Neve understood that later, much later, that nothing Torvald did was ever quite an accident, even when it wore the costume of one. But at the time, standing at the top of the main staircase with a stack of ledgers pressed to her chest, she believed the world had finally generously decided to be kind. Because there he was, alone, adjusting the cloak across his shoulders as if preparing to ride out. Dark waves catching the light. And then his eyes lifted and found her, and he smiled. Not the careless smile he threw at everyone like coins to a crowd. A slower one, a focused one, a smile that seemed impossibly to be about her. "Neve," he said. That easy voice pitched low, as if they shared something. "Haven't seen you around." A lie. He saw her every day. She saw him every day. But never like this. Never with the full warm weight of his attention landing on her like sun after a long, gray week. "I was in the library," she managed. He came down a step, hands in his pockets, loose, unhurried, and yet his eyes moved over her face with a curiosity that had never once been there before. Always working. He tilted his head. "Do you ever rest?" "Someone has to keep things in order." He laughed, soft, and the sound went straight through her all the way down. "You know," he said, and now he was closer, too close. "I've been thinking about you." The world tilted on its hinge. "About me. I don't think I've given you the attention you deserve." She could not answer. Her throat had closed entirely. This was the exact sentence she had written in her journal 100 times, and torn out, and burned, and written again one day. You'll see me. And here it was spoken aloud in his voice in the flesh. It was him her heart sang. In the corridor. It was him. And now he's here. Finally here. Seeing me. He reached out, brushed her arm. 1 second. Just one. Enough to raise every hair on her skin. We should talk more, he murmured. Just the two of us. Whenever you're free. And before she could gather a single word, he was already moving past her, already down the stairs, already tossing one last smile over his shoulder, like a man scattering breadcrumbs behind him, without ever once looking back to see if the bird followed. Neve stood frozen at the top of the staircase. I thought about me. He wants to talk. Just the two of us. 6 years. 6 years of waiting, and it had finally come. From the landing above, in the shadow, where the great staircase turned, Alaric saw every second of it. He saw the smile. He saw the practiced lean of his brother's body. He saw the touch on the arm, light calculated, deployed the way Torvald deployed everything for maximum effect at minimum cost. And he saw the way Nev stayed rooted to the spot afterward. Cheeks flushed, eyes lit as if she'd been handed a promise straight from the mouth of the divine. And something coiled tight and low in his chest and would not let go. It's none of your business, he told himself. Except it felt like all of it was. Every last inch of it. He came down the stairs with silent steps. He passed within arm's reach of her. He did not look at her, did not say a word, because if he opened his mouth right now, he had no idea what would come out of it. And a king does not get to say the things that were rising in his throat. He went straight to the training yard. "Someone spar with me," he said, and his voice came out harder than he meant it to. The warriors glanced at one another. When the king came to train like this, jaw-set eyes black, it usually meant someone was about to be hurt, and it usually was not the king. A big man named Doran stepped forward. Doran almost never lost. "I'll go, your highness." Alaric did not answer. He stripped off his cloak, stepped into the sand. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. He held nothing back. Every movement was brutal and precise and gave no ground for defense. Doran tried to counter and found each blow blocked and returned with twice the force behind it. Alaric put him down 3 times. On the third, Doran stayed down chest, heaving a bright line of blood at his lip. "Get up," Alaric said. Doran got up, staggering. But before he could set his stance, the king had already turned and walked out of the ring, leaving the yard in stunned silence behind him. The captain caught him at the gate. Careful, low. "My king, did something happen?" "No." Alaric lied, wiping the sweat from his jaw. "I needed to move." And he left before anyone could ask him a question he did not have a clean answer for. Over the following days, Torvald began to appear. Not obviously. Torvald was never obvious. But enough. He found her in corridors, always with some light remark that startled a laugh out of her, before she could stop it. He turned up in the library while she shelved records, offering help she didn't need, but accepted anyway, just to keep him near a little longer. Once he brought her a fistful of the last garden roses and pressed them into her hands with a grin, saying he'd thought of her the moment he saw them. Neve kept the roses as if they'd been forged from gold. And Torvald. Torvald knew exactly what he was doing, because he'd noticed the way she looked at him now, the way her whole face opened when he appeared, the way her breath caught when he stood too near. It was adoration, pure and uncut. No games, no masks, no demands, and that he found was rather pleasant. Different from the others, the ones who wanted promises, who wanted more than he ever intended to give, who kept score. Nev kept no score. She simply looked at him like he was the best thing that had ever happened to her. And Torvald liked being the best thing that had ever happened to someone. It cost him nothing, and it filled something in him that was, if he'd ever bothered to look, always just slightly empty. It wasn't love. It wasn't near love. But it was comfortable. And she was pretty in a quiet way. Nothing like the loud, obvious beauty of the ladies who circled him. There was something in her he couldn't quite read. A fragility with a spine of iron running through the middle of it. So he kept feeding her attention, kept smiling, kept letting her believe that maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to feel something too. And he never once corrected her about the corridor. Because he didn't know about the corridor. He only knew a woman had begun to glow at him, and he had always assumed he was the reason. Which meant the lie now had two fathers. One who had told it with his silence out of love, and one who accepted it without ever knowing it, existed out of habit. And Nev standing in the middle, believing both of them believed in her. Alaric watched it unfold and reached the ragged edge of what he could stand. He saw his brother circling her like a patient hawk over a field. He saw her light up, saw Torvald scatter crumbs of attention while she gathered them up like a banquet. And one gray afternoon, he found her alone in the small garden near the rose bushes, already going brown with the cold. An open book forgotten in her lap and her eyes lost somewhere far away. He stopped a few steps off, hands clasped behind his back, watched her a moment before he found the nerve to speak. Never. She startled, nearly dropping the book, and rose in a rush. Your Highness, I didn't... Sit, softer than he meant it. Please. She sat, tense. He moved to the bench and looked at the roses instead of at her, because looking at her directly had become a thing he could not always afford. I need to talk to you, he said, about my brother. Her whole body went rigid. Torvald. What about him? You've been spending a great deal of time with him. Not a question. An observation weighted with something he was working hard to hide. Her chin came up. Her defenses came up with it. And that's a problem. It can be. Why? He dragged a hand down his face. Because the honest answer that it should have been him in that corridor, that it was him, the honest answer would burn everything to the ground. Because I know my brother, he said instead. Better than you do. I know how he is. With women. Her cheeks flushed, not with shyness, with anger. With respect, Your Highness. That's not your concern. It is. Harder than he intended. When it involves someone under my protection, it is. Protection! She laughed short, and without any warmth in it. I didn't ask to be protected, and I'm not a child who needs someone standing guard over her feelings. It isn't about that. He stepped closer, and the air between them thickened. It's that Torvald can't tell the difference between attention and affection. He likes being admired. He likes a person looking at him as though he's something rare. But he doesn't know how to love. Not yet. And when he grows bored, he leaves. More feeling came out with that than he had permission to feel. He heard it. She heard it too. She stood, her eyes bright, hurt, and furious in equal measure. Why do you care? Her voice shook. Why does it matter to you at all? Because I can't bear the thought of you breaking. Because I have watched you for years. Because when I close my eyes, I see the corridor. Because I made a promise, he said. his voice rough. "To your father, before he died. He asked mine to look after you and your mother. And when my father died, that promise became mine." He watched the words land, watched her weigh them, and he saw with a strange low ache that she believed them. Because it was true. Only it was so far from the whole truth that speaking it felt like a second lie stacked on the first. "A promise," she repeated, quietly now. "So that's all it is. Duty." No screamed everything in him. "Yeah," he said. Something in her face closed, went cool, went distant. "Thank you for your concern, Your Highness." Formal, careful, a door swinging shut. "But I can look after myself, and I don't need anyone deciding for me who I'm allowed to care about." And before he could answer, she was already walking away, already leaving the garden, leaving him alone with the brown roses as the first cold rain of the season began at last to fall. Alaric closed his eyes. Fool, he thought. You tried to pull her back and shoved her straight into his arms. After that, Nev avoided him. Not dramatically, just thoroughly. When she saw him in a corridor, she turned down another. When he entered a room, she found a reason to leave it. At meals, she kept her eyes on her plate and refused, absolutely refused to look at the high table. And Torvald noticed. He noticed something had happened between Nev and his brother. He noticed how she clung a little harder to his own attention now, as if she had something to prove. And Torvald, being Torvald, made full use of it. He stayed closer, touched her shoulder more often, bent to murmur things in her ear that made her laugh, and made sure always to do it when Alaric was near enough to see, just to watch his brother's face. And his brother's face did the same thing every time. The jaw locked tight, the fists curled, the stare that could reduce a man to ash. But Alaric said nothing. He couldn't. Not without unspooling the one thing he could not afford to let unravel. It was Malin who finally cracked the door. Neve had taken to sitting with the old man in the afternoons. He asked nothing of her. He never looked at her with pity, because he could not look at her at all, and somehow that made him the safest person in the castle. She would read to him from the ledger's dry lists of grain and coin, and he would listen as if they were poetry. "You've gone quiet again," he said one afternoon when the reading had trailed off. "Your footsteps have started apologizing once more. I'd hoped we were past that. It's nothing. You keep telling me things are nothing." He smiled at the middle distance. "You must have the emptiest life in the kingdom for all the nothing in it." She laughed despite herself. And then, because he was safe, because he was blind, because sometimes the only person you can tell a thing to is one who cannot watch your face while you say it. She said, "The king told me I was his duty, a promise he made to my father. That's all I am to him, a debt he inherited." Malin was quiet a long moment. "Is that what he said?" "That's what he said." The old man turned his clouded eyes toward the garden. "I knew your father, Neve. I told you that. What I didn't tell you is what he asked for at the end." She went still. "When Bryn was dying, he did not ask the old king to feed you, or house you. Any lord will house a beta's orphan. It costs little and looks well." Malin's voice softened, roughened, as if he were reaching back across many years to lift something heavy. "No, your father asked for one thing. He asked that you be kept safe, and I remember his exact words because they were strange, and strange things. Stay until the day she sees her own worth, not before. Because if the world teaches her she's nothing, before she learns she's something we'll have lost her, and no wolf will bring her back. The garden went very quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold. He wasn't afraid you were weak, Malin said gently. He was afraid the world would convince you that you were, before you had the chance to find out otherwise. Neve could not speak. Her eyes had filled, and she was glad, fiercely glad, that the old man could not see it. And the king, Malin went on almost idly, has kept that promise more faithfully than you know. He said it was duty, did he? Malin smiled, and there was something wry in it, something that had watched 3 generations lie to themselves about their own hearts. Child, let me tell you a thing about men raised to be kings. They are taught very young that they are allowed to feel exactly one thing: duty. Everything else they learn to smuggle inside it. So when such a man tells you he acts out of duty, it is wise to ask what else he has folded up and hidden underneath the word. She walked home that afternoon with her heart in a strange new shape, because it was the ledgers that undid her in the end. She'd been sorting the old household accounts, dull work, the dullest columns of expense going back years when she noticed the pattern. She almost missed it. She nearly turned the page. Except she didn't. A line from the first winter. Alaric had worn the crown. Servants' quarters, east wing. Reassignment widow, Orla, and daughter from lower hall to inner rooms, by order of the king. The inner rooms, the warmer ones, away from the draft that came off the lower hall in winter and settled into old lungs. She turned pages, found more. Firewood ration, east servants' quarters, increased, by order of the king. Medicines apothecary standing account, widow Orla, by order of the king. Her mother's cough, the one that had been getting worse for years. The medicines Neve had assumed came from the general poor fund that she had been quietly grateful for and never once questioned. By order of the king. She turned more pages faster now, her hands not quite steady. Administrative Post Records Office created. Assigned daughter of Bryn. Dated the very season she turned 18. The season the wolf did not come, and the whispers began, and she had waited sick with dread to be sent away. A girl who could not transform, taking up space in a warrior's castle. Instead, she had been given a post, a safe one, an invisible one, a dignified one. She had thought it was luck. She had thought it was leftover charity from a dead king's promise, by order of the living one. And then, near the bottom of a page from 2 years back, in a clerk's hand, recording an order given aloud, she found the last one. And it was this one that broke her open. Note: any complaint or petition regarding the daughter of Bryn is to be brought to the king directly and to no one else, by his express command. Neve sat very still in the records office as the afternoon light moved across the floor, because she understood now why the cruelty had always had a ceiling. Why Sethra's poison had run underground rather than out in the open. Why for years the castle had let her be small and sad and overlooked, but had never quite let anyone destroy her. Someone had been standing between her and the worst of it. All these years, silently, taking no credit, asking for no thanks, not out of a duty inherited from a dead father. Out of something he had never once said out loud. It was him, she thought. And it was not the corridor she meant this time. It was everything. She should have gone to him. She almost did. She stood 3 separate times, and started for the door, and 3 separate times. She sat back down, because what would she even say? I found your kindness in the ledgers, and now I don't know who I've been in love with. Because she had spent 6 years so certain her heart was pointed at one brother, that turning it even an inch felt like the ground moving under her feet. Because she was afraid, not of him, of being wrong about her own life. So she did nothing, and she told no one. And she carried this new impossible knowledge home and lay awake beside her mother's rattling breath, staring at the dark, feeling the whole careful shape of her world beginning very quietly to come apart. She did not get long to sit with it, because Sethra, it turned out, had been waiting too. It came 3 days later, a cold, bright morning frost still silvering the grass. Neve was in the smaller garden, helping her mother gather the last of the herbs before the true freeze took them when she saw Sethra approaching. Alone. For the first time in weeks. No ladies, no cruel smile, just a neutral face almost tired. Almost, and this was the thing that disarmed Neve. Almost sorry. Neve. Sethra stopped a few steps off, hands clasped in front of her. May I speak with you? Neve straightened, wary. Speak alone, please. Just hear me out. There was something in the voice, something Neve had never heard from Sethra, before, something that sounded incredibly like shame. Orla shot her daughter a look sharp as a needle. No, said the look. But Neve, who had just spent 3 sleepless nights, learning that people were not always the thing they appeared to be, that cruelty could hide kindness, that a king could hide his whole heart inside a single, dutiful word, Eve thought foolishly, hopefully, then maybe the reverse is true. Maybe a cruel woman can be sorry. It's all right, Mama, she said. I'll be right back. She would remember afterward the exact expression on her mother's face. She would remember it for a very long time. Sethra led her out past the stables, down the stone path that ran to the river, cutting through the castle's lands. The water there ran fast and swollen from the autumn rains, its roar swallowing every other sound, so that by the time they reached the bank, the whole world had narrowed to rushing water, and the two of them. Sethra stopped, turned. I know I was horrible to you, she said, and her voice sounded true. I know I was cruel, and I wanted to say I'm sorry. Neve blinked, thrown off balance. You're sorry. I was jealous of you. Sethra lowered her eyes, the very picture of shame. The way people look at you now, the way the king treats you, it isn't an excuse, but it's the truth. I don't want any of that. The words came out of Neve, soft and real. I never did. I don't want attention. I don't want enemies. I only ever wanted... She stopped. I only ever wanted to be left in peace. I know. Sethra smiled faintly. And you deserve that. That's why I wanted to clear the air. So we could, I don't know, start over. She held out her hand, and Neve, tired, hopeful, freshly taught that people could surprise you, looked at that outstretched hand and felt the knot in her shoulders begin at last to loosen. Maybe, she thought, maybe things really can be different. She reached out to take it, and that was when she felt the shove, hard, brutal, from behind, because Sethra's hand had been the distraction, and the 2 other ladies had come down the path behind them, silent as frost, and Neve had been so busy, hoping she had never heard them at all. She didn't even have time to scream. Her body twisted in the air, arms flailing at nothing, and the water took her in an icy shock that ripped every breath from her lungs. Cold. So cold, it burned. She fought toward the surface. Broke it for one gasping instant, long enough to see them on the bank, 3 of them. Sethra in the center, "This is a lesson, Nev," Sethra shouted over the roar. "So you learn where you belong." And then the current pulled her under again. Water flooded her mouth, her nose burning down into her chest. She struck a rock, pain exploded through her shoulder, her hip, and she swallowed more of the river, and the cold was stealing the strength from her limbs, turning them to something heavy and useless, and not quite hers. "I'm going to die," she thought with a strange, flat clarity. "I'm going to die here in the cold because I hoped again, because I always hope, because I never learn." And then, from somewhere far down inside her, deeper than fear, deeper than cold, deeper than the water, a voice. "Fight. Don't you give up. Not like this. Fight." She tried. She tried with everything she had left, but the river was stronger. It always had been. The dark came up to meet her. Alaric was in the council chamber when he felt it. It was not a thought. It was not logic. It came up through him like a blade through cloth, sudden, total, undeniable. Danger. I was on his feet before he understood why his chair crashing backward across the stone. "Your Highness," a counselor began. But he was already gone, already through the doors, already running through corridors downstairs, following something he could not name, and did not question some deep animal instinct that had woken all at once and pointed like a hound. Nev. Her name arrived in his chest with the force of absolute certainty. He burst out of the castle, crossed the gardens, followed a trail only he could sense some thread of scent, some pull below reason, and when he reached the river and saw the three women standing on the bank staring at the water, and saw a flash of red hair go under and come up again far downstream, the world stopped. And then he was running again, faster, tearing his sword from his belt and flinging it into the grass, kicking off his boots without breaking stride, and he hit the water in a flat, hard dive. And the cold meant nothing to him, nothing at all. He swam like something possessed, cutting the current, muscles screaming. He reached her just as she slipped below the surface. For the last time, her eyes closed, her body gone limp, already halfway to gone. He caught her, dragged her against his chest, and fought the river for her because the river wanted her, and he would not let it have her. The water pulled, clawed, tried to tear her out of his arms. But he was stronger. He had always been stronger. He held her as if his own life depended on it, because in some way, he did not have words for it, did. And he swam until his feet found the bottom, until he could stand, until he could stagger up onto the bank and collapse onto the grass with her cradled against him. She wasn't breathing. The terror that hit him then was so complete it nearly stopped his own heart. He rolled her to her side, struck her back, again, and Neve coughed. Water poured from her mouth, her nose, and she coughed again, her whole body convulsing as it fought to expel the river from her chest. "Neve." He held her face in both hands, sweeping the wet hair back from it. "Neve, look at me. Look at me." Her eyes opened, green and unfocused and disoriented, and they found him. "Alaric," she rasped, his name broken. "I'm here." His voice shook. He who never shook. "I'm here. You're safe. You're with me." She began to tremble from the cold, from the shock from all of it, and he pulled her into his chest and wrapped himself around her, trying to pour his own warmth into her, because she was freezing. Warmth into her, because she was freezing. She was so cold, it terrified him. "Don't let go of me," she whispered against him, her hands fisted in his soaked tunic. Please, don't let go." "Never," he said, and it was the most honest word he had ever spoken in his life. "I will never let go of you." And then, because the fear was still too fresh, because the image of her sinking was still burning behind his eyes, because the relief of holding her alive was more than any careful man could hold, inside a careful body, he did the thing he should not have done. He kissed her. It wasn't planned. It wasn't thought. It was pure instinct, pure need. His lips finding hers, cold and wet, but alive, so alive. The kiss was desperate, urgent, as if he needed to prove to himself that she was there, that she was breathing, that the river had not won. His hands framed her face. His fingers tangled in her drenched hair. He kissed her as if it were the last thing he would ever do. And Niamh felt it, all of it, the firmness of his lips, the urgency, the way his hands trembled faintly as they held her face, the taste of river water and desperation and something beneath it, something with no name. This kiss. And the memory detonated inside her. The corridor, the blue ribbon, the dark, the waiting, the footsteps, the whispered question, "Is it you?" The heat of a body, the scent of earth and leather and something wild. This kiss. It was the same. It was exactly, precisely, unmistakably the same. It had never been Torvald. Not in the corridor. Not for one single second. It had always, 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 always been him. Niamh pulled back sharply, her breath catching her eyes flying wide. And Alaric froze. The whole world froze with him. "Nev," he said, hoarse, stricken. "I'm sorry. I acted on impulse. I shouldn't have." But she wasn't listening to the apology. She was looking at him. Really looking. The way she realized she had never quite let herself look before. At the dark hair dripping river water. At the jaw she'd watched clench across 100 rooms. At the eyes that had held hers in a garden and said, "I think this is yours," and meant something so much larger than a book. At the man who had crossed a garden to save her from shame. Who had moved her sick mother to warmer rooms. Who had paid for the medicines. Who had built a wall around her life so quietly she had never even known the wall was there. At the man who had kissed her in the dark and then let her give the credit to his brother, rather than take from her a single ounce of the hope it had given her. "It was you," she whispered. Not a question. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His face answered for him every guarded, careful line of it coming open at once. And there behind it laid bare the thing he had carried in silence for longer than either of them had counted. "The corridor," she said. Her voice was very quiet, and it did not shake, which surprised them both. "It was you, all this time, and you let me think. You, I couldn't tell you." The words came out of him raw. "Because the moment I did that light in your face would go out, and I would rather have died than be the one to put it out. So I said nothing, and I have hated myself for it every single day since." The river roared. The frost melted in the grass where they lay tangled and soaked and shaking. And Niamh, 22 years old, who had spent 6 years pointing her whole heart at the wrong brother, felt the ground move under her one final time, and then, at last, go still. Because now she knew where she was standing. But she couldn't speak. Not yet. It was too much, the cold, the near drowning, the truth arriving all at once like a second river. So she only nodded. Once. And she saw him understand that the nod was not an answer. Not yet, only an acknowledgement. Only I know. I finally know. And then his face changed, because he'd remembered how she got into the water. Never. His voice dropped, and something in it went cold and lethal. Why were you in the river? How did you fall? She blinked, coming back to the pain in her body, the ache in her shoulder and hip. Sethra, she said. She asked to talk, said she wanted to apologize. She brought me here, and someone pushed me. The change in him was instant and terrible. His face closed completely, went to something older than the king, something older than the man. His eyes darkened almost to black. His jaw locked. And for the first time in her life, Neve saw it, truly saw it, the alpha behind the crown. Not the civilized ruler who governed with words and patience. The wolf, the one who would kill to protect what was his. They tried to drown you. Not a question. I think they only wanted to frighten me. A lesson. They almost killed you. The fury in his voice was a physical thing. He turned, looking upriver, where the women had surely fled by now. She saw his muscles coil, saw the decision harden in his black eyes. Alaric, she began, but he was already moving. He retrieved the sword from the grass, pulled on his boots, and then he turned back to her, and the lethal thing in his face softened only for her, only when his eyes landed on her. Stay here, he said. Command wrapped around concern. Don't move. I'll come back for you. And before she could protest, he was climbing the bank. Sethra and the other two were still near the river's edge when he found them. They turned at the sound of him, and Sethra's face, which had been arranged into something victorious, collapsed the instant she saw the king. Soaked to the skin, dark hair streaming, and something in the way he moved that made every survival instinct they had scream at once. Your Highness, Sethra tried, her voice pitched too sharp. We were only silence. One word, a blade. He stopped in front of them, and all three stepped back without deciding to. You pushed her into the river. Not a question. An accusation. A verdict. It was a joke, one of the others whispered. We didn't mean. You nearly killed her. The silence after that was absolute. Even the river seemed to lower its voice. He looked at each of them slowly. And when he spoke again, it was quiet and controlled and more terrifying than any shout could ever have been. You will go back to the castle. You will go to your quarters. You will speak to no one. You will not leave. You will wait for my judgment, and you will do nothing else. Do you understand me? 3 mute nods. And if you run, if you try to hide what you did, if you try to place it on another. He stepped closer, and his presence crushed the air out of the space between them. I promise you will wish I had been the merciful kind of king. He did not need to say anything more. They ran. I went back down the bank to where he had left her. And Neve was sitting up now, arms wrapped around her knees, shaking, watching him come. And something in the sight of her, there alive, undid the last of the wolf, and left only the man. He knelt, wrapped his cloak around her shoulders, still warm from his body, gathered her up out of the frost. Can you stand? With you, she said. I think I can do most things with you. I went still, looked at her, and whatever he saw in her face made his own crack open one more time. Neve, he said carefully. You're shaken. You nearly died. Whatever you're feeling right now, I won't hold you to it. I won't take advantage of a moment like this. When you're warm and safe and thinking clearly, if you want to walk away from all of it from me, you can. I'll never speak of it again. She looked up at him. River-soaked, half frozen, and she almost laughed because after everything after the wall he had built around her life, without ever once asking for thanks, he was still even now trying to give her a door out. "You always do that," she said softly. "Give me a way to leave, as if you can't imagine anyone would want to stay." He didn't answer, because that was, of course, exactly it. "I'm not confused, Alaric." She said his name deliberately, the way you plant a flag. "The cold's confusing. The river's confusing. This isn't. I don't know when it started. Maybe it was always there, and I was just looking in the wrong direction, at the wrong brother, at the easier story. But I know now, and I don't want you to push me away. Not again." He searched her face for doubt, for the hairline crack of hesitation. He found none, and so at last the careful king gave in. "I didn't kiss her. Not there. Not with her half frozen, and the river still roaring, and 3 women's cruelty still hanging in the cold air." He only pressed his forehead to hers, and closed his eyes and held her the way a man holds the one thing he spent his whole life certain he'd never be allowed to want. "This changes everything," he murmured. "Good," she whispered back. "I was tired of everything the way it was." He carried her home through the frost, wrapped in his cloak, and the castle watched from its high, cold windows, and it did not yet know what it had witnessed. But it would. In the days that followed, the whole castle felt the ground shift. Alaric summoned Sethra and the other 2 to a private audience. No witnesses, no shouting. No one ever learned exactly what was said behind that door. But when the 3 of them came out, they were pale and shaking, and one of them was weeping. The punishments were made public. Sethra and the others were stripped from the elite ranks of the royal guard, not exiled, but broken down, reassigned to the lowest duties, moved out of the noble quarters, into plain ones, barred from the banquets and the balls, and every glittering circle they had lived for. For women who had built their whole lives out of status and admiration, it was a fall with no soft place at the bottom. And Alaric made it unmistakable in a single short and devastating declaration in the Great Hall. "Anyone who touches Nev again by hand, by word, or even by look, will answer to me, and there will be no second warning." The hall went silent as a grave. The message was received. From that morning on, Neve was no longer an easy mark. Not because she had suddenly become strong in any way the kingdom could measure, but because the king had drawn a line around her, the king the Alpha, and no one was foolish enough to step across it. And Nev spent those days in a strange, quiet daze, alive, safe, and carrying 2 enormous truths at once, turning them over and over like river stones. It was never Torvald. It was always him. She began gently to withdraw from the prince. Not cruelly, not all at once. When he sought her out in the corridors, she had somewhere to be. When he brought her flowers, she thanked him, and did not keep them. When he tried to talk, her answers came brief and polite and cool. And Torvald noticed. For the first time in his charmed and careless life, Torvald felt the specific, unfamiliar sensation of a thing slipping out of his hands that he had assumed would always be there for the taking. And he did not like it. He did not like it at all. He saw the way she searched for his brother now, across the great hall, when she thought no one was watching. He saw the way she tensed when the king entered a room not with fear, but with something warmer, something worse. He saw the careful distance the 2 of them kept, the studied not looking, the way 2 people avoid each other only when there is something between them worth avoiding. And Torvald, who had never in his life wanted a thing until the moment it stopped, Wanting him felt something turn over in his chest that he had no practice naming. He watched his quiet, adoring, red-haired shadow lift her eyes to his brother's face across a crowded room and go soft all over. And the prince, who had never fought for anything, decided for the first time that he would fight for this, which was, of all the dangerous things that had happened that autumn, perhaps the most dangerous of all. Because a careless man is only careless until the moment his pride is wounded, and then he becomes something else entirely. Part 3. The prince found her in the garden. It was the same bench, the one where Alaric had once sat and called his love a promise. The roses were fully dead, now black stems bent under the first true cold, and Niamh sat among them with a book open in her lap that she was not reading. She was somewhere else entirely. She was thinking about a man with river water in his hair, so she didn't hear Torvald come. Never. She turned, and he was there closer than she expected, and something was different about him today. The easy shine was gone from his eyes. Something tense had taken its place. Torvald. She stood on instinct, putting the bench between them. I was just leaving. No. He stepped into her path when she moved to pass. Not before we talk. I have to go. No. He came closer, and her back met the bench, and there was nowhere left to go. You're avoiding me. You're different. Torvald, please. You still care for me. Not a question. A verdict handed down by a man who had never once in his life been refused. I know you do. You always have. Everyone knows it. Things have changed. And on that, he leaned in to kiss her. No. She turned her face away, both hands flat against his chest. Stop. But he didn't. Never. Stop fighting it. His voice dropped low into a register meant to be persuasive, and landing, instead, as something cold. You want this. You've always wanted this. You just need to stop thinking and feel. He tried again, hands rising to grip her face, to turn it back to his, and she shoved harder, and her heart was pounding now, not with desire, with fear. I said no. Her voice shook. Torvald, let me go. Please. Why are you being like this? Frustration cracked through him. Real wounded ugly. You looked at like I was everything. And now that I finally see you, now that I want you, you pull away. Because I don't want you. The words came out hard and honest, and they hung in the cold air between them like something breaking. Just let me go. But he didn't let go. Because he was too used to being wanted. Because a lifetime of easy yeses had left him with no map for a single no. And wounded pride in a man who has never had to feel, it turns very quickly into something dangerous. He leaned in again, more forceful now, pressing her back against the stone. And then he was gone. It happened so fast, Niamh barely saw it. One moment Torvald loomed over her. The next he was flying backward, hauled off by hands she knew. Alaric. The king stood there with his eyes blazing, his jaw locked, and that wild, lethal thing in him she'd seen at the river. The wolf. The alpha. Pure and terrible. Get away from her. Low, rough, vibrating with barely held violence. Torvald caught his balance, genuinely stunned for a heartbeat. Then the pride surged back up, and he straightened. This is none of your business, brother. None of my business. Alaric stepped forward, and his presence filled the whole cold garden. You were forcing her. She told you no, and you kept going. She's confused. Torvald's voice rose. Confused because of you. You got into her head. She told you no. Each word a blade laid down flat. That isn't confusion. That doesn't mean insist. It means no. And a man who can't hear that word has no business calling himself one. Since when do you care about anything but the crown? Torvald shouted, and the hurt in it was real and old and had nothing to do with Neve at all. Since when does she matter this much to you? The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Alaric didn't answer with words, but the look he gave Neve, quick and unguarded and unbearably tender, said everything a word could have. And Torvald saw it. He let out a laugh with no humor in it. You feel something for her. That's absurd. She can't even transform. She's weak. For the good of the kingdom, you shouldn't even want. The punch landed before he finished. Sharp, precise. It caught him across the jaw and snapped his head sideways and dropped him to his knees in the dead roses, one hand flying up blood on his lip. No, Alaric's voice was deathly calm. You don't speak about her like that. You don't speak about her at all. You don't look at her. You don't go near her. Ever again. Torvald spat red into the frost and lifted his eyes to his brother's. Does she love you? His voice had gone strange. Is that it? Did you finally find one person in this whole kingdom who looks at you without being afraid? Get up. Why? A bitter smile. So you can hit me again. Again, hurt your own brother over a girl who... I said get up. Torvald got up, unsteady, wiping blood on the back of his hand, and for a moment it looked like he might swing muscles, tensing fists curling. Don't. Alaric's voice was quiet now, but the warning in it was absolute. You'll lose, and you'll be hurt far worse than you already are. Don't make me do that to you. You hit me. Torvald still sounded stunned by it. You hit your own brother. For her, I hit you, because you forced a woman who told you no. Alaric didn't blink. And I'd have done the same to any man alive who did it. Especially you. Because you, of all people, were raised to know better. Torvald stared at him, breathing hard, blood dripping from his chin onto the frost. And then, because there was nothing left to say, because he had lost in every possible direction, at once, he turned to go. But at the edge of the garden, he stopped, and he looked back at Neve one last time. And when he spoke, the arrogance was gone, and underneath it was something Neve had never once suspected was there. Something young, something hollow. Say it then. His voice cracked. Say you love him. Say you choose him. Just say something. Neve looked at him. This beautiful, careless, wounded man she had wasted 6 years of hoping on. And she felt of all things a strange and unexpected pity. But she said nothing, because there was nothing kind she could say that would also be true. Torvald let out a broken sound, half laugh, half something else, and walked out of the garden, trailing blood, and a lifetime's worth of shattered assumptions behind him. And when his footsteps had faded entirely, when there was only the wind in the bare trees, Alaric turned to her, and the wolf drained out of him all at once, and left only a man terrified of what he might find in her face. Are you all right? His voice was rough, heavy. Did he hurt you? She shook her head, but she was trembling. I tried to make him stop. He wouldn't. I know. Pain flooded his voice. Pain for her, for the fear he'd seen. I know, and I'm sorry. That I didn't reach you sooner. That I... He dragged both hands down his face, and when he spoke again, his voice broke clean in half. You undo me, knave. Every time something happens to you, every time I see you in danger, I can't think. I can't breathe. All I feel is that I have to keep you safe. And I've run out of ways to pretend that's a small thing." The words hung there between them in the cold. And Nev looked at him, at the raw, exposed thing in his eyes, the confession he'd finally stopped being able to bury, and something inside her that had started in a dark corridor and grown on a garden bench and cracked wide open on a riverbank finally completely gave way. She crossed the space between them and pulled him down to her. The kiss was different from all the others. It wasn't desperate like the river. It wasn't secret like the corridor. It wasn't confused like 6 wasted years. It was chosen, awake, certain. She kissed him, like a woman who has finally understood the story she's been living inside and turned at last toward the right page. He tried to pull back. His hands came gently to her shoulders. "Never. Wait. You're shaken. You're frightened. I can't. I'm not confused." She held his face in both her hands and made him look at her. "I found you in the Ledger's Alaric." He went very still. "The warmer rooms for my mother. The firewood. The medicines. My post. The order that every complaint against me came to you, and to no one else." Her voice trembled, but not with doubt. "All these years. You were standing between me and the worst of the world, and you never let me see it. You let me think I was lucky. You let me think I was small. Because you'd rather I feel safe than feel grateful. Never kun. That was never a debt you owed my father." A tear slipped free, and she let it. "It was you, all along. And I'm not going to let you pretend it away. Not anymore." He searched her face one final time for hesitation, for the crack for the door she might still walk through. There was none. And so the careful king, who had denied himself everything for everyone for his entire life, finally stopped denying himself this. The kiss deepened. A lifetime of restraint breaking loose all at once. And when they finally came apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers and closed his eyes. "This changes everything," he said again, as if he still couldn't quite believe he was allowed. "You keep saying that." She almost smiled. Let it. The days after passed with a new kind of strangeness. They no longer hid. Not entirely. They made no great public show of it, but they no longer pulled apart when the eyes of the kingdom found them. And the kingdom noticed. The king searched for her across the great hall now. She no longer looked away when she caught him. The whispers started soft, then grew. The king and the girl without a wolf, impossible. He's never looked at anyone. She must have done something. But the whispers had lost their teeth. Not after what had happened to Sethra. No one was foolish enough to test the line the king had drawn. And Neve, who had spent her whole life shrinking, curving her shoulders inward, trying to take up less room in a world that had told her she deserved less, Neve did not shrink, because every time the old doubt crept back, she remembered. The corridor, the ledgers, the riverbank. A man who had chosen her quietly for years before he ever chose her out loud. 5 days after the garden, he came to find her. She was in the small records room sorting old guard rolls when the door opened. She turned, expecting her mother. It was Alaric. He shut the door behind him, and the little room went smaller with him in it. His hair was tied back loose, a few strands escaping. He wore a plain tunic, and there was something different in his face, something almost nervous. "Your Highness," she started. "Alaric." He corrected her softly. "When we're alone, it's just Alaric." The name felt far too intimate in her mouth. She nodded, her heart quickening. "I need to ask you something." He drew a breath. "The Wolf Ball is in 3 days." She knew. Everyone knew. The great gathering of the year. When the whole kingdom came together, when pairs were presented, when the court watched and judged and remembered. She had never gone. Women without a wolf did not go. And when they did, they stayed in the shadows, serving never seen. "I want you to come," he said, "with me, as my partner." The world stopped. "Your partner?" "Yes." He crossed the small room until only a step remained. "I want you at my side. I want to dance with you in front of all of them. I want them to see." His voice dropped heavy with everything held under it. "Tell me, do you want to come with me?" She looked at him, at the dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole the breath from her chest. And the answer was so simple, she almost laughed. "Yes," she said, "I do." The relief that crossed his face was so pure, it made her heart ache. He took the last step and cupped her face in both his hands, thumbs brushing her cheeks. "You're certain one last door offered, because once we walk into that hall together, once I present you as mine, there's no unmaking it. The whole kingdom will know, and they will have opinions. Some will accept it. Many won't. It will be hard. I know." She covered his hands with hers. "And I want it anyway." He kissed her, slow this time. Deep. Not the river's desperation. Something that had all the time in the world. The night of the ball came wrapped in mist and promises. The great hall had been transformed. Torches threw gold across the ancient stone. The long tables groaned with food and wine. The whole kingdom seemed to be there. Nobles, warriors, guards, counselors, envoys from the borderlands, all in their finest, all drinking and talking and waiting for their king. Alaric came to fetch her himself. He appeared at her door at dusk in formal dress for the first time in longer than she could remember. A black tunic, worked with silver. Tall boots. His wild, dark hair loose over his shoulders and somehow perfect against all that formality. He was devastating. When she opened the door and saw him there, her heart stumbled. Behind her, Orla stood with her thin hands pressed to her mouth and her eyes shining. "You look beautiful, my little fire," her mother whispered. Nev smoothed the green dress they had borrowed, drew a breath, and put her hand in Alaric's. He led her into the corridor, then stopped, and looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You're beautiful," he said, huff, "not next to the others." "More." He tipped her chin up. "Infinitely more. Because it's you." And he kissed her there in the corridor before the doors, a kiss that quieted her nerves and set fire to everything at once. When they reached the great doors of the hall, the guard swung them open. Inside, the noise was enormous conversation laughter, the roar of a whole kingdom at play. But the moment the doors opened fully, the moment the crowd saw who was entering, and how silence fell like a blade. The king, and Neve on his arm linked through hers as though it were the most natural thing in all the world. Conversations died mid-word. Heads turned. Hundreds of eyes landed on them at once. She felt the weight of it, the judgment, the shock rolling through the hall like a wave. But Alaric squeezed her arm, a small, silent thing, "I'm here," and she lifted her chin. They descended the steps into the hall, and the crowd parted before them, without being asked, opening a path. No one spoke. They only watched. because the king had never brought anyone to this ball. Not once. In all the years since the crown came down onto his young shoulders, he had arrived alone, refused every match, kept his careful distance from the whole world. And now here he was, with the girl without a wolf on his arm, looking at her as though she were the only living soul in the kingdom. Sethra stood by a column, pale, her eyes wide, with a shock that curdled fast into something poisonous. She had been broken and demoted and barred from every circle she'd lived for, but she had wheedled her way into the hall on the arm of some minor cousin, because a viper does not stop being a viper simply because you cut its rank. And she was not finished, because she had one card left, and she meant to play it in front of the entire kingdom. Alaric led Neve to the center of the floor and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Everyone's staring," Neve whispered. "Let them." His eyes did not leave hers. "Let them." And then, before the silent watching kingdom, he drew her into his arms, and they began to dance. And for one perfect turn of the music, the whole terrible weight of all those eyes fell away, and there was only the warmth of his hand at her back, and the certainty in his gaze, and Neve, who had spent her life at the edges of every room, was, for the first time, at the very center of one, and not afraid. Which is exactly when Sethra struck. The music was still fading when her voice rang out across the hall, pitched to carry sharp and clear, and rehearsed. "Before the king humiliates himself further." A ripple went through the crowd. Perhaps the kingdom should know what kind of woman he's chosen. Alaric went rigid. Neve felt the whole hall turn. She threw herself at the prince for years. Sethra stepped forward into the open floor, and her voice dripped false sorrow. "Everyone here has seen it, chasing him through corridors, writing him letters, and when he wouldn't have her a girl who can't even transform, she crawled to his brother instead. She's not a mate, Your Highness. She's a climber, and she's making a fool of you in front of your entire court." The silence that followed was the worst sound Neve had ever heard, because it was the silence of a hall, deciding whether to believe. And the old shame came up in her throat, like river water, the old certainty that she was small, that she was less, that she had been caught reaching above her place, and everyone had always known it, and now they'd say so out loud. Alaric's hand tightened on hers. She felt him draw breath to defend her, but he didn't get the chance, because someone else spoke first. "That's a lie." The whole hall turned. It was Doran, the big warrior the king had put down 3 times in the sand. He stepped forward from the ranks of the guard, arms crossed. "I've watched that woman carry ledgers through this castle for 4 years, he said, flat and certain. Never once heard her ask for a thing. Not rank, not favor, not one coin more than her due. If that's a climber, she's the worst one I ever saw. She sat with my grandfather." A young serving woman near the wall, her voice shaking but rising. "Old Malin, when no one else had the patience, read to him for hours, for nothing, for no one watching." She lifted her chin. "Oh, do you want to talk about who she is when there's nothing to gain? I'll talk about it all night." And then another voice, and another. A cook who remembered her carrying broth to sick servants. A stable hand she'd taught to read from her own ledgers. One by one, from the edges of the hall, from exactly the overlooked and invisible corners where Neve had spent her whole overlooked and invisible life, people began to stand. Not warriors, not nobles, the unseen, the ones who had seen her. Because it turns out that a person who is kind, when no one is keeping score, builds a fortune in a currency the Sethras of the world never think to count. And it comes due all at once on the night she needs it most. Sethra's face had gone from pale to gray. She looked around the hall for an ally, and found none, found instead a rising tide of quiet people, speaking at last the thing they'd always known. And Nev stood in the middle of it, tears sliding down her face, understanding something that rearranged her from the inside out. She had not been invisible. She had only been looking in the wrong place for who was watching. Alaric raised one hand and the hall fell quiet, and when he spoke his voice carried to every corner of it. You've all heard the truth from people with nothing to gain by telling it, so I'll only add mine. He turned to Neve and took her hands, and did not lower his voice, did not hide a word of it. Nev is the strongest person I've ever known. Not because she's won battles, not because she's commanded armies, because she survived loss, cruelty, a whole kingdom telling her she was nothing. And she came through it kind. She came through it brave. She came through it whole. And tonight I want every soul in this hall to know that I choose her, that I claim her, if she'll have me. The hall held its breath. Neve looked up at him, at the naked question in his eyes, the whole guarded heart of him, laid open in front of the kingdom he ruled. Yes, she whispered. And then, so the whole hall could hear it. Yes, I'll have you. He leaned down and kissed her. There, in the center of the great hall, in front of the entire kingdom. A kiss that left no room for doubt. A kiss that said, she is mine, and I am hers, and anyone with an objection may speak now. No one did. And Sethra, broken, exposed alone in a hall that had turned as one against her, slipped toward the doors and was gone, and no one watched her go. When they parted, Alaric held Neve's gaze one moment longer, and then his expression shifted into something tender and grave all at once. He tilted his head and murmured low, only for her, "This will hurt, but only for a moment. Do you trust me?" Her heart pounded so hard it ached. "I trust you." He brushed the red hair from her neck, baring the pale skin there. He leaned in. His lips grazed the curve of it, gentle as a breath. And then he bit. The pain was immediate, sharp, like liquid fire racing through her veins. She gasped, her hand seizing his shoulders, her whole body going taut. And then, something changed. Something woke. It was as if a door that had been locked her entire life burst open all at once, and it did not feel like breaking. It felt like coming home. Power flooded through her, wild and ancient and enormous. She felt her bones begin to shift, her skin begin to burn, the world tilt to impossible angles. Some frightened human part of her cried. What's happening to me? But there was no stopping it, and strangely no wanting to. The transformation took her with a force that dropped her to her knees, the green dress tearing as her body changed, expanded, remade itself. She heard cries around her, heard the hall erupt, but it all seemed very far away and very small next to the roaring homecoming happening inside her own body. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was done. Where Neve had knelt there, now stood a wolf. Enormous, far larger than any first transformation had a right to produce. Her fur was the deep red brown of her hair, gleaming in the torchlight. Her eyes were the same green, but lit now wild and luminous, and the sheer power radiating off of her filled the hall like heat off a fire. The whole kingdom recoiled. Even the seasoned warriors, even the visiting envoys, Even Alaric took one instinctive step back, overwhelmed by the force of what she'd become. And into that stunned silence a voice rose, old and dry, and full of a knowledge older than the crown. Malin. The blind elder rose from his seat, and he came forward without fear, tapping his way to a few paces from the wolf, and he smiled toward a thing he could not see, but had always somehow known was coming. "The gifted wolves wake early," he said, and his voice carried through the silent hall. "But the powerful ones, take their time. Because when they finally wake, when they've found their reason, their purpose, the one they'd wake for, there is nothing in the world to match them." He turned his clouded eyes toward the king, then back to the wolf. "She was never weak." His voice cracked with something like pride. "She was only waiting. Waiting for a reason worth waking for. Waiting to be seen." He bowed his old head. "Now she shows you what she always was." And the wolf Neve turned her great head. And here was the moment the whole kingdom would tell their children about in the years to come. Not the size of her, not the power. This, because the first thing Neve did in all her terrible new strength, the very first thing, was not to strike or roar or show the hall. What she could do to those who'd called her nothing. She crossed the floor, and she went to a thin, weeping old woman standing at the edge of the crowd, one hand pressed to her rattling chest, and the enormous red wolf lowered her great head gently, so gently, and laid it in her mother's lap. Orla's shaking hands sank into the thick fur, and she bent over her daughter, and wept not, with something too large and too tender for any word to carry. The hall went utterly still, because a whole kingdom had just watched the most powerful wolf any of them had ever seen choose as her very first act tenderness, not vengeance, not display love. And every soul in that hall understood all at once that they had spent years overlooking someone far greater than themselves. Alaric came forward slowly, ignoring the frightened murmurs, and knelt beside her. "It's all right," he said softly, his hand finding her fur. "It's me. You're safe. You always were." The wolf turned her green eyes to him, and he saw her there, Neve behind the wild shape, the recognition, the wonder, the fear. And she pressed her great head to his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her neck and held on, and whispered into her fur, meant for no one else in the world, "You're extraordinary. You always were. And now they all know it too." The change back took longer. Alaric led her from the hall, away from the eyes, into a private room, and covered her with his own cloak when she finally returned to herself, shaking, exhausted human. She collapsed against him, and the tears came at last. Not from sorrow, but from relief, from exhaustion, from the sheer enormity of it all. "I didn't know," she managed between breaths. "All my life. I never knew I could. No one did." He held her firmly, warming her. "But they know now, and they will never, ever underestimate you again." She lifted her face to his. "You knew. You always said I was strong, even when I couldn't see it. I didn't know about the wolf." He brushed the damp hair back from her cheek. "But I knew what I saw. A woman the whole world called nothing, who chose kindness anyway every single day, with no one clapping. That was the strong thing. The wolf is just the part everyone else can finally see." And the words broke something open in her, something old and sealed and finally free. And she pulled him down and kissed him, desperate, grateful, wholly, and completely his. And he kissed her back, and held her like the most precious thing in the world. Because she was. She always had been. When they came back to the hall hours later, Neve in clean, borrowed clothes, her hair still damp. The ball was still going, but everything in it had changed. People looked at her differently now. Not with disdain, not with pity, with respect, with a kind of awe, with in some faces a healthy and well-earned fear. Sethra was gone. Exposed, disgraced, cast out, but not destroyed. Alaric had made sure of that in the days that followed. She was stripped of her rank and her place, and sent from the court for good to make a smaller, humbler life somewhere, far from the halls she'd poisoned. But he did not have her killed. He did not even have her harmed. Justice isn't vengeance, he told Neve later when she asked. Vengeance would have felt good for an evening. Justice lets me sleep for the rest of my life, and it lets you become something better than the thing that hurt you. That's the only revenge worth having, the kind where you don't become them. And Torvald. Torvald was there too, at the far end of the hall. Alone. Not dancing. Watching his brother and the woman he'd toyed with and never truly seen, and there was something new in his face, something quieter. He had spent his whole life being adored and mistaking it for being loved. And in one cold garden, in one word he'd never heard before, know the difference had finally reached him. Later he found them. He stopped a careful distance off, and he did not smile his easy smile, because it had left him somewhere on the road to becoming a man. "I'm leaving for a while," he said. "The border holdings. My uncle's been asking for someone to oversee them, and I've been avoiding it because it's dull and hard, and no one there will tell me I'm wonderful." A rueful breath, which is probably exactly why I should go. He looked at Neve, and for once there was nothing performed in his face at all. "I'm sorry," he said, simply. "I saw a person looking at me, and I never once bothered to look back. I mistook being wanted for being worth something. But that's mine to fix now, not yours." And Neve, who had wasted 6 years of hope on him and might have hated him for it, felt only a clean and quiet peace. "Go well, Torvald," she said, and meant it. He nodded to his brother, something passing between them, old and wordless, and beginning at last to heal. And then he was gone. Alaric drew Neve back toward the center of the hall, his hand firm at her back. The music had softened into something slow and warm. "One more dance?" he asked, a rare true smile tugging at his mouth. "Always," she said, and they danced. As partners, as equals, as two wolves who had found each other in the middle of a cruel and complicated world, and simply stubbornly chosen to stay. The kingdom watched, and judged, and then slowly, and then all at once, accepted. And Neve, turning in the arms of the man who had seen her all along, finally understood the truth. Her mother and her father, and a blind old man, had each been trying in their own way to hand her since the very beginning. She had never been weak. She had never been nothing. She had never been less. She had only been waiting all those long, quiet years, curved inward, against a world that told her she was small, waiting for the one thing that wakes the deepest strength in any of us. Not power, not proof. To be seen, truly seen, all the way down, and loved there anyway. And Alaric, who had spent his whole careful life certain he would never be allowed to want anything for himself, held her through the turning of the music and let himself at last simply want this. It was love. It had always, from the very first, been love. And somewhere in the drifting music, an old blind man lifted his face toward a warmth he could feel, but never see. and smiled, because he had lived long enough to watch the quietest, most overlooked soul in the whole kingdom become the brightest, and that he thought